Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. On behalf of Strategic Vision Institute, I welcome you all to day 2 of SVI 2-day webinar on Indian strategic behavior and stability in South Asia. The topic of today's discussion would be Indian arms buildup, a source of instability. Before we proceed further, I would like to mention that this webinar will be conducted in the form of panel discussion during which each speaker will be given 15 minutes. Kindly note that by default, mics of all the attendees will be on mute and only panelists will be allowed to use the mic and video. If anyone from the audience would like to ask a question, they are requested to kindly use the Q&A option to type out their question. Please do include your name as well as your organizational affiliation along with your questions. The question will be then presented to our panel by the moderator during question and answer session accordingly. Please further note that all the opinion voiced at the SVI platform are independent opinion of the speakers and not the official policy of the SVI. This is an open house activity which will be reported in media. The session is being live streamed on our Facebook page and our official website as well. The full recording of the webinar will be available on official website and YouTube channel of the SVI. If anyone would like to tag or post screen grabs of this event on their personal blogs, web pages, or social media, please do not forget to mention that webinars was organized by SVI. We have a very distinguished panel for today's discussion. Now let me introduce you to our speakers. Our first speaker for today's webinar would be Dr. Zafar Khan. Dr. Zafar Khan is currently Executive Director of Balochistan Think Tank Network, Quetta. He is MSc in International Politics from University of Glasgow, UK, and PhD in Strategic Studies from University of Hull, Yorkshire, UK. He has taught at the Department of Strategic Studies, National Defense University, Islamabad. His papers have appeared in various international peer-reviewed journals. He has authored books such as Pakistan Nuclear Policy, a Minimum Credible Deterrence in 2015, Nuclear Deterrence in South Asia, New Technologies and Challenges to Sustainable Peace in 2020, and India's Evolving Deterrence Force Posture, Temptation for Preemptive Strikes, Power Projection and Escalation Dominance in 2021. Today, he will be sharing his thought on the impact of India's force modernization or acquisition of emerging technologies on strategic stability. Our second speaker for today's webinar would be Brigadier Dr. Naeem Salik. Dr. Naeem Salik is currently Executive Director at Strategic Vision Institute, Islamabad. He has taught at Qaid-e-Azam University and National Defense University and Air University, Islamabad. He has been visiting scholar at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and a visitor in DC. He has previously served as Director of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at Strategic Plans Division. He did his MSc in Strategic Studies from University of Wales, UK, and PhD from the University of Western Australia. His areas of expertise include South Asian security with special reference to Indian and Pakistani policies on nuclear and missile issues, nuclear non-proliferation, arms control and disarmament, nuclear and conventional confidence building measures, nuclear safety, security, and export controls. He has published 4 books, including 2 edited volumes, several monographs, contributed 7 book chapters. His published work also includes over 40 research articles. Today, he will be speaking on India's growing military capability and its nuclear doctrine. Our third speaker would be Dr. Nasir Hafeez. Dr. Nasir Hafeez is Director of Research at Strategic Vision Institute, Islamabad. Dr. Nasir holds a PhD from the Department of International Relations from National Defense University, Islamabad. He has been associated with School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University as Visiting Research Associate in South Asian Studies Center. Has published several research papers in various journals and participated in various international and national seminars and conferences. His areas are national and international security, nuclear strategy, nuclear diplomacy, non-proliferation, arms control and disarmament, discourse analysis, strategic foresight, and scenario planning. Today, we'll be speaking on Indian arms buildup, challenges and policy option for Pakistan. With this, now I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Zafar Khan, to deliberate on the impact of India's force modernization or acquisition of emerging technologies on strategic stability. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Banu. Many thanks for the invitation and kind introduction. Am I audible? Once I just need to confirm.
Yes, sir, you're audible. You
okay.
Carry on.
So many thanks for the invitation and kind introduction. It is good to be at the SVI webinar once again under the new leadership of Brigadier Dr. Naeem Salik. I'm sure SVI will further groom up intellectually. The talk I'm given to speak for 15 minutes is the impact of India's force modernization, acquisition of emerging technologies on strategic stability. In this talk, I would first like to have little discussion on the theoretical underpinning of emerging technologies before I elaborate further what and why India desires to modernize and deterrent forces, its deterrent forces and acquire emerging technologies, followed by the implication of such force modernization and the acquisition of these nascent technologies. In more complex security dynamics, emerging technologies such as the sophisticated deployed defensive systems that are considered as defensive by one state may be perceived as offensive by the rival. Even if one acquires such a technology that has the capacity for outflanking the rival's conventional and delivery systems of nuclear forces, such technologies could broadly be used for offensive and preemptive strike purposes. Here, the offense takes a lead vis-a-vis the defense. Arguably, the balance shifts to offense rather than defense, and such offensive imperative could tempt state to wage wars for quick victories. Nevertheless, despite the perceived technological opportunism for quick victories and wars, many fail to achieve such military goals, ultimately suffer the unintended consequences for using technologies for offensive purposes. Therefore, sophisticated technologies increase temptation for waging wars with quick victories, even though such technologies might be considered as defensive. In doing so, this undermines the prospects of strategic stability, if not the total erosion of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence has its own essence and meaning in the real politics. Embedded with the element of nuclear revolution and the existence of mutual assured destruction, which is called MAD, states, despite aspiring for sophisticated technologies, tend to respect each other's credibility of their deterrent forces. They do not get involved into deadly wars, prevent intense security competition, and avoid arms race beyond the level of MAD that could bring destruction to all and victory to none. Such is the essence of nuclear deterrence that may increase with the potential increase of emerging technologies as force multipliers and first movers. Thus, newer technologies may not replace the primacy of classic nuclear deterrence between the nuclear powers. In other words, such technologies could become complement to nuclear deterrence. Technologies may undermine the broader strategic stability between the nuclear rivals, since nascent military technologies always tempted states for offensive acts. But in the nuclear domain, when it changes the warfare dynamics, such temptation to be offensive always increase the prospects for miscalculation, accidents, and inadvertence for serious military conflicts spiraling up to a nuclear level. It can become a business with a dangerous confidence. Presumably, it is this fear of use of nuclear weapons, despite the presence of essence of military technologies, rivals in their best interest of mutual survival could potentially work out to avoid serious military conflicts. Besides, smaller nuclear states, while possessing little or no sophisticated military technologies, can still deter the stronger side possessing nuclear weapons bolstered with sophisticated technologies. This can be through issuing nuclear signaling that if the bigger side threatens the smaller one with the use of nascent technologies or emerging technologies, the smaller nuclear power for its ultimate survival could use nuclear weapons first in the serious military crisis. To support this theoretical assumption, one can find out instances during both the Cold War and the post-Cold War eras. For example, the US threatened to use its nuclear forces first against the mighty Soviet Union conventional forces during the Cold War. During the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons against the modernized conventional forces of the US and its European allies if they directly intervene in the Ukraine crisis. That being noted, the weaker side, while possessing credible nuclear deterrence, can deter the side with the sophisticated military technologies if the deterrence signaling is credible enough. Moreover, for every nascent technology, for every emerging technology, there is a nascent or emerging counter technologies to retain a balance, thereby preventing the side with the advantageous offensive firepower. Anti-satellite weapon system, anti-submarine warfare, anti-tank system, tactical nuclear weapons against the forward deployed military forces in a conventional asymmetry, multiple independently re-entry vehicles, which is called MIRVs, supersonic and hypersonic missile systems against the advanced ballistic missile defense system, including many other newer technologies in the pipeline, could be termed as a nascent counter technologies. The vicious cycle for acquisition of emerging technologies, the production of a counter-effective technologies, and the nascent method to counter the counter-effective technologies may continue to be the normal part of international politics. Such effective technological countermeasures may produce certain options for smaller military powers. Number one, to retain a balance. Two, to prevent serious military conflicts between the two rivals. And three, to keep the MAD intact in technological domain as well. India's consistent force modernization is taking place in both conventional and nuclear domains. Such force modernization includes anti-satellite weapon system, S-400 sophisticated air defense system, ballistic missile defense system, intercontinental ballistic missile, re-entry vehicles, submarine launch ballistic missiles, tactical nuclear weapons, supersonic, and more recently, hypersonic missile capability. Primarily, such force modernization comprises some of the key essential of emerging technologies such as speed, lethality, stealth, and cyber and space. If India can acquire such technologies, then it will attempt to acquire more sophisticated technologies such as sophisticated drone, semi-autonomous, and remote sensing weapon system. The acquisition of these emerging technologies for force modernization raises many other complementary questions. Why does India want to develop its force modernization and acquire sophisticated nascent technologies? What does India want to achieve? Whether or not India will be able to achieve such goals to outflank its potential adversaries in the region. How could India's force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies affect the South Asian strategic stability? First, with its force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies, India desires to retain escalation dominance, influence, and power projection in the broader South Asian region. India aspires to be the regional power, if not the superpower. It argues that it is the largest democracy, bearing a population of 1.4 billion people, and the sixth in the economic ranking of the world after the US, China, Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. It certainly wishes to acquire the permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. It aspires for membership in most of the export control regimes, including that of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Interestingly, it has an increasing volume of strategic partnership with the United States, Russia, France, and Israel. More interestingly, it is an important part of the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But at the same time, it is an integral part of the Quad, aiming to contain the spread of China. It is equally interesting to observe how it attempts to retain a balance between the United States and Russia, despite the US and European rivalry with Russia over the Russian-Ukraine war. It is surprising how India diplomatically engages its relationship with Iran and at the same time with Saudi Arabia, Israel, and other Middle Eastern countries. All that being said, no one ignores India for their political and geo-economic imperatives, and that in turn provide incentives to India to modernize forces, bring changes to its military and nuclear policies, and demonstrate its power and influence in South Asia. Second, India continues to modernize its military and nuclear forces bolstered with nascent technologies, which in turn provides India incentives for striking first in the event of serious military crisis. Newer technologies increase the confidence of India to get offensive with the erroneous belief that it could quickly achieve its military and political goals. However, many tried in the past but failed to do so. Despite the acquisition of nuclear technologies, one should not get into dangerous and flawed confidence to be offensive for getting rapid victories, particularly in the presence of nuclear weapons. Countries, including that of India, on its way for emerging technologies such as cyber, speed, stealth, remote sensing, may create broader instability because of the perceived offensiveness related to such technologies. Their abrupt conclusion that such technologies could eliminate the relevance of nuclear deterrence while they find out the loophole to fight and win a war is flawed, dangerous, irresponsible, and delusional. Such a framework could increase the chances of crisis, instability, arms race, security dilemma, and the potential risk of war between the nuclear rivals. Third, the more recent misfiring of India's supersonic missile reflects either India wants to test Pakistan's resolve and the value of nuclear deterrence, or there is a serious issue with regard to India's centralized command and control system that undermines the safety and security measures needed to prevent accidental and miscalculated military crises in South Asia. That said, if it is to test Pakistan's resolve, then India is attempting to find out the loopholes, which in turn could attempt India for preemptive strike. If India tries to create loophole to exploit to its advantage, then the Pakistani side create effective countermeasures to retain a balance. However, if it is considered as an accidental launch, as India declared it this to be, then this creates a serious question about the safety and security mechanism of India's nuclear weapons and their related delivery systems. Because any rogue element in the system could do any rogue misfiring of such acquired technologies, potentially risking a serious military crisis that no sane leadership may desire this to happen in the first place. Fourth, If India has to learn anything substantial out of the August 9 misfiring of supersonic missile as a part of its emerging technologies project, it needs to accept the proposed joint probe to find out what really happened and why. It respect the value of nuclear deterrence of its rival, revisit the safety and security mechanism of its deterrent forces, and to be transparent on its deterrent force posturing. Moreover, it should not erroneously and abruptly conclude that it could find a loophole to meet its political and military goals quickly while possessing newer technologies. There is always an effective countermeasures for every nascent technologies. However, newer technologies tempt offensiveness tempt to strike first, and striking first means the failure of deterrence in the presence of mutual assured destruction. What comes next is hard to elaborate for anyone. Fifth, one of the important aims of India's force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies could be that it may desire to have independent military and foreign policy rather than to be dictated by its allies and strategic partners. India, as its foreign minister, S. J. Shankar, has more recently quoted that India has its own choices to go for without necessarily following the dictum of others. India's aspiration for such power and influence can be reflected in the following recent episode. One, despite the US and European allies' pressure on India not to buy energy from Russia because of the US sanctions on Russia on account of Russia-Ukraine war, India consistently opposes the US stance and continues to buy the Russian oil and gas to the best of its national interest. Two, just before the US complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, the US asked India to send its military forces to Afghanistan. India rejected this proposal for obvious reasons. Third, India also objected to one of the US submarines entering into India as part of exclusive economic zone in the Indian Ocean region, terming this as a threat to its security. All such instances clearly reflect that India aspires to follow its own choices, primarily based on its military force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies. That said, more studies need to be carried out as to how and why India's force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies increases India's aspiration to become a regional power free from the dictum of its allies and strategic partnership, including that of the US. Finally, one has to further analyze how India's force modernization and acquisition of emerging technologies can affect strategic stability of South Asia. One may argue that it will potentially increase arms race, crisis instability, risk of escalation, and serious military conflicts between the two rivals. However, there is always an option for Pakistan, as the logic goes, to produce effective countermeasure to retain balance and prevent the adversary from striking Pakistan. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for providing your detailed analysis on the subject. Now, I would like to invite our second speaker for today's webinar, Brigadier Dr. Naeem Salik, to deliberate upon India's growing military capability and its nuclear doctrine. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shehban. And I think Dr. Zafar has elaborated the various aspects of India's conventional force modernization and how it is going to impact on the nuclear deterrence and strategic stability in South Asia. I would not go into the details of various kinds of technologies which India is inducting, other than giving passing references, because I know it's, partially it has been covered by Dr. Zafar Khan, and I think the rest of it would be covered by Dr. Nasir Hafeez. So to avoid any repetition and overlap, I would focus more on the impact of the technological advancements in India on the Indian nuclear doctrinal thinking. As far as Pakistan is concerned, we know that the basic objective of Pakistan's nuclear deterrence is not only to deter nuclear threat from India, it is also aimed at deterring the conventional aggression by India. And that is why Pakistan's nuclear doctrine and Pakistan's deterrence policy remains sensitive to any changes even in the Indian conventional force posture. So that basic fact has to be kept in mind, because any changes in the conventional force profile of India is bound to have an impact on Pakistan's nuclear thinking and Pakistan nuclear doctrine. In India, in 1999, once they announced their draft nuclear doctrine in August 1999, they tried to project themselves as a very transparent nuclear power, and they had declared their nuclear doctrine and the objectives of the nuclear weapons capability. But later on, we have found that over the years, although it was stated in the initial doctrine that India's credible minimum deterrence remains a dynamic concept, over the years, we have found that the force configuration and postures have changed, but the declaratory policy has remained the same, which is not understandable because it cannot happen. Doctrine is always dynamic and it changes with the change in security environment as well as technological advancements. So there are bound to be changes in India's doctrinal thinking, but somehow they have kept it ambiguous and not come out in public with the changes in doctrine. The declaratory level doctrine remains the same. However, many Indian analysts have also pointed it out that at the operational level the doctrine has undergone substantive changes. And we have seen some indications of that through the statements of Shiv Shankar Menon. And Shiv Shankar Menon is no ordinary person. He has been India's foreign secretary, and for many years he was the in charge of the Indian Executive Committee of India's the nuclear command and control structure. So he was a person who was as insider and knows exactly the thinking and deliberations in terms of India's nuclear establishment. So the hints he gave at the possibility of India carrying out a preemptive strike and change of Indian posture to the first strike kind of a posture was a clear signaling to the outside world that there is a change which is underway in terms of India's nuclear thinking. And we also got statements from the former Indian Defense Minister, Mr. Parikar, and the current Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, indicating that in India's uneasiness with the current no first use doctrine, and they want to move away from it. And in fact, what was clear is that they don't want to be bound by it. It is just a ploy to get some brownie points and project themselves as a responsible nuclear power. But actually, once it comes to the operational requirements, they might just throw it out of the window and change posture at short notice without any declaration at that time. Now, with this background, we have to look at what are the drivers and what mode changes the build-up of conventional as well as nuclear forces. And there are three models in front of us. First is the action-reaction model, which has been the predominant model in terms of India-Pakistan relations, and the competition between India and Pakistan at both strategic and conventional level has been driven mainly by the action-reaction model. Then is the domestic structure model, which was not very prominent and very effective in India and Pakistan, but now in the past decade or so, particularly since the advent of the Modi administration in India, that has become the predominant model because India's strategic policies are now driven by their domestic political imperatives. And to fulfill those domestic political imperatives, they are doing certain things to benefit politically, particularly at the time of national as well as state elections. So that is getting more and more important. And the scientific and civilian bureaucracy, defense bureaucracy also plays a very prominent part in this. And the third model is the technological imperative model. Now that is also becoming more and more effective in terms of India's arms buildup, whether conventional or nuclear. And initially, as we know, once you have an advanced and extensive research, military research and development infrastructure, it is the policy which allows the setting up of this infrastructure and provides resources to it to move on. But then a stage comes once the technology starts driving policy. And India is now fast reaching that stage where the technology is going to affect the policy choices. And in particular, I would like to refer to this here about two particular technologies in terms of the nuclear capability. In fact, there are more also. First of all is the Indian effort to develop and deploy ballistic missile defenses. Now, once the ballistic missile defenses are deployed, irrespective of their effectiveness, they create a false sense of security. And once you know the shortcomings of your missile defense system, then you have the temptation of the first strike effort, so that you can destroy as much of the adversary's capability on ground before it is launched against you, thinking that the residual capability, once it comes at you, your missile defenses will be able to take it on and manage it. So that is one thing which drives the policy, as well as the choices like move from no first use to the first strike type of strategies. The second is the MIRVs. Now, MIRVs are also more useful in terms of counter force rather than counter value. And the second strike capability is mainly predominantly counter value. But once you have MIRVs alongside the BMDs, then it gives you further temptation and encouragement to go for a first strike, because now you have the tools for the first strike. And then it is also your compulsion that your missile defenses can have a limited capacity to intercept the incoming missile. So you would like to destroy as much of the enemy capability on ground before they're launched at you. So both these combined will definitely push the policy towards the first strike kind of posture. Similarly, then if you have the capabilities like the maritime capability, and you have been introducing canisterization of some of your missile systems, you are moving away from the past nuclear posture of recessed deterrence as well as assertive centralized control. So both these things will be affected by these two technologies. Once your weapons are at a higher state of alert because of the canisterization, the geographical distance between the warheads and delivery systems is no more there once the weapons are canisterized and they are ready to fire at short notice. So therefore, that it takes you away from no first use, and you go towards the preemptive and first strike capability. Similarly, the current state of assertive centralized control will be diluted once you put some weapons on the submarines because of the difficulty in communicating with the submerged submarine and exercising control. So a degree of delegation is already there once the submarine moves out on station during a conflict or crisis situation. And if the communication breakdown, which is very high probability, then it is at the mercy of the captain of the submarine and his executive officer to decide. So that assertive centralized control and the political control, which the Indians emphasize again and again, that we have political control on nuclear capability, that will be neutralized once they put more and more of their weapon systems on the submarines. in addition to this, all these things will be enabled by the agreements which India has signed with the United States recently, the 4 foundational agreements, and especially the facility they have received from the US in terms of real-time intelligence and surveillance and data from the American intelligence satellites. Now that will enable India the target acquisition, real-time target acquisition, and they will be able to monitor the movement and the placement of the locations of Pakistani strategic forces during a conflict situation. That was something which was lacking, which would have prevented India from attempting a first strike, because they did not have the real-time surveillance and target acquisition capability. With this information now available through the American assets, they now have all the ingredients which can enable a first strike possibility to India. So they can acquire the targets in real time. They can carry out surveillance about the movements and placement of the targets. And now they have the tools to strike at those targets. So all these things will lead to the first strike capability. Similarly, in fact, there have been reports that this intelligence information, the capability has already helped India in its standoff with China in the Ladakh conflict, where this information was shared by the Americans with India, and it helped India in locating the movements and dispositions of the Chinese forces. India has also tested anti-satellite weapons. Now, we know that the satellites, whether they are communication satellites or surveillance satellites, they are a very important part of the nuclear command and control structure. And with this kind of capability, India can strike at Pakistan's surveillance as well as communication satellites, and thereby adversely affecting Pakistan's nuclear command and control. So this capability also is very dangerous, and unfortunately, once the Indian tested this, there was no reaction by the international community to this, because it was seen as a display of India's capability to match a similar capability by the Chinese. So they just look at the Indian capabilities from the Chinese prism, and in that context, the negative impact it is going to have on Pakistan are simply ignored. As we all know that this concept of the emerging technologies, which Dr. Zafar was also mentioning, the convention technologies, in particularly the realm of hypersonic missiles, and because of their speed and accuracy, these can be used for carrying out a preemptive strike against the strategic assets of the other side. Now, how these will be viewed, because in terms of the side which uses these technologies or these weapon systems based on these technologies to carry out a preemptive strike against the strategic assets of the opponent, thinking that they are not going to cause much collateral damage and they can carry out the strike with ease. But on the receiving side, it will be seen as a preemptive strike, whether carried out by conventional or nuclear weapons, and the reaction is going to be the same. So this can also create a false kind of an impression, and there'll be greater readiness to use these weapons for such kind of missions, but then that can cause inadvertent escalation to the nuclear level, and it has to be used carefully. That is why this concept of entanglement of advanced conventional weapon systems with the nuclear capabilities has been discussed lately at various forums. we so as we all know that the doctrines are subject to change, and they remain dynamic. They will change depending on the change in security environment as well as technological developments. As the capabilities evolve, the doctrines will also evolve. And if India is going this way by introducing advanced conventional technologies as well as expanding its strategic capabilities, it is bound to affect Pakistan, because if they insist that these developments are meant to match Chinese capabilities and the advancements in Chinese capabilities, the fact cannot be denied that they are bound to affect Pakistan as well. Because if there is a missile or any other weapon system or an aircraft, advanced aircraft, if it can be used against China, there is no restriction on it that it cannot be used against Pakistan. You just have to turn the missile around from one direction to the other. So this will have the same effect. So the capability is there, and it can be used against any country. So if it can be used against China, it can also be used against Pakistan. So Pakistan's security dilemma also has to be taken seriously, and this current attitude of being dismissive of Pakistan's concern and justifying those as India's response to the Chinese threat has to be seen in the actual context of the situation on ground. Because as we know, most of India's forces, at least 85% or so, are deployed along Pakistani borders, and they are oriented towards Pakistan. So they cannot be used across the Himalayas, particularly their mechanized forces. So this threat to Pakistan has to be taken seriously. As we all know, India has been one of the top 5 arms importers in the world in the last decade. The major suppliers being Russia, France, Israel, and South Africa. The United States has also opened its advanced technologies to India, particularly in the areas of space, missile defense, and maritime surveillance and anti-submarine capabilities in terms of P-8 Orion aircraft. With the ongoing process of joint naval exercises in the context of Quad and bilateral exercises with Japan and United States, India is also gaining experience of the advanced technologies being used by other countries, and also developing its interoperability. So all these are definitely going to have an impact on these technologies, are going to have an impact on India's doctrinal thinking and posture, whether they declare it publicly or not, or they keep it ambiguous. But these changes are bound to be there, and we have to anticipate those and be prepared to deal with those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salik. Now I would like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Nasir Hafeez, to deliberate upon Indian arms buildup, challenges and policy options for Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Sherbano. I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You're
okay. Since this is a webinar and we have a lot of online participants, so I am really grateful to the participants, those who have joined today's seminar. There's a long list of 43 participants, and there are more joining in. So I may not be able to name them all, but I think there are many familiar names here. So we are all at SBI grateful to these participants by virtue of their presence. I think we will be able to deliberate on today's topic. First of all, let me be very thankful to to join today's panel along with Dr. Zafar Khan and my mentor and my teacher, Dr. Naeem Salik. So in his presence, I feel quite comfortable and nervous at the same time. I'm very careful in using my words But at the same time, I'm very happy that whenever I'll be struck up, I can seek his help. Let me begin with saying that this discussion on today's topic on Indian military buildup, challenges and options in Pakistan is in the backdrop of the overall topic of this webinar, that is the Indian strategic behavior and stability in South Asia. I'm extremely grateful that the previous speakers have already covered a lot of area in this under this topic, and have set the stage for finally looking into the challenges and options for Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, India and Pakistan, we are all aware, are trapped in a perpetual cycle of hostility with a long-standing territorial disputes and a history of warfare. We are quite also aware that the nuclearization of South Asia has changed the dynamics of warfare and employment concept of hard power, and war is no longer an option, and we have to seek resolution of political disputes through other means. And Pakistan, throughout this time frame, has been advocating and proposing a lot of measures to conflict resolution and also to maintain strategic stability. But unfortunately, India has not shown any interest in normalizing its relationship with Pakistan. Recently, we have seen the phenomena of the rise of Hindutva in India because of the rise of BJP in Indian politics that has further aggravated the situation. So with this backdrop, we can safely say that this adversarial relationship between the two adversaries is not likely to change within the foreseeable future. We are quite aware that Indian economy and Indian capacity to arms and to arms acquisition and to pursue arms acquisition and military buildup is unmatchable. It has, as already highlighted, the sixth largest economy of the world, and which is only marginal difference after China. There is a marginal difference between the rest of the three top economies of the world. It has over $3 trillion of GDP, and with an impressive growth of 8.9% last year. And due to this capacity, it can allocate around $76 billion for defense budget in 2021, almost 7 times more than Pakistan. India is the world top arms importer for the last 10 years, with arms imports equating to 11% of the total world import. Its military hardware, as already highlighted, 46% of it comes from Russia, 27% from France, 13% from Israel, and 12% from US. India is upgrading its defense capabilities with almost 93 military modernization projects worth billions of dollars currently in progress, and this monumental arms buildup is not without challenges. And let me say at the very outset that this presentation which I'm going to make, and the ideas which I'm going to present, the data, is all based on open source data. We have not much insight into what exactly is happening inside India, but these data do reflect what are the challenges being faced by this large arms acquisition program. Indian military has several issues. Its large size make the modernization process an uphill task. It is, the second largest military after China from the manpower standpoint. The organization is suffering from manpower shortages, obsolete weapons and equipment, lack of adequate ammunition. They are inducting a lot of weapons, but they are suffering from a lot of ammunition issues. There is a desired reliance on Make in India, but the quality of indigenous research and development is inadequate, and there is a lot of reliance on foreign imports. And quite aware of the politics of the technical specification, the field trials, the quality assurance, the contract negotiation and financing are dealt by many agencies, as more than 8 different agencies, which are accountable to different administrative and bureaucratic heads. In addition, there are cases of corruption at the highest political level and even within the armed forces. Around 1,080 cases of alleged corruptions involving armed forces personnel were reported since 2010, with the army topping the list with 1,046. Almost all the cases are within the armed forces, with the army. As per the army report submitted to Indian Parliament, it says that some 68% of the army equipment may be described as vintage. Only 8% could be considered the state of the art. So this is the size of the military, and just we can say that the few state of the art equipment are just topping onto the big cake. They are not the large size, the large component. The sea services are facing a shortage of around 9,362 officers and around 1.13 lakh soldiers, airmen, and sailors. Indian Army has over 3,500 main battle tanks in its arsenal, and most of the tanks are old T-72 Russian built. At the same time, Indian Air Force is also seriously facing the shortages of strength. At full strength, it operates 42 squadrons, but it can currently only field 31 squadrons. Missing the 11th squadron, it cannot man 11 squadrons. Aircraft such as MiG-21, which entered service in 1964, they should have been retired years ago, but they are still flying. Indian Navy is in the middle of restructuring itself with a focus on projecting its combat power beyond its coastal waters. The service has seen its share of defense budget shrink from 18% in 2012 to 13% in 2020. It currently has only one aircraft carrier, the ex-Soviet INS Vikramaditya, with a second INS Vikram. So these two aircraft carriers also have their own problems. Moreover, the submarine program, which India, including the nuclear submarine program they are following, they are also not without the challenges. As I already highlighted, in the ammunition side, even holding weapons is not enough. We have also seen during the Kargil conflict that the use of the buffer guns resulted into the shortages of ammunition. So there is a report submitted by former Auditor General Shashikant Sharma, which was tabled in the Parliament in July 2017, that Indian Army, there is 80% of Army's 152 types of ammunition did not meet the war wastage reserve levels, and 55% of the ammunition item did not meet the minimum acceptable risk level. So see, if they are maintaining a large inventory of weapons, so this is the problem with their ammunition. And one such point, a very minor point, that the Indian Army or Indian ordnance factories have stopped producing the ammunition boxes, and they have tried to induct it from the civilian vendors, and they have stopped supplying those boxes because of the increase in the price. So now there are a lot of ammunition lying in the ordnance factories and is not being packed and is not being transported because of shortages of the ammunition boxes. We can say that Indian procurement of defense equipment and technologies is impressive, but there are serious challenges and operational problems. Converting this equipment into military capability, it needs additional components, and that are lacking. Now, if we look at the challenges which Pakistan is facing and the options available to us, the situation is less than satisfactory. Our military structure and system is not much different from India. Currently, we are facing acute economic constraints which are seriously hindering our capacity to modernize our armed forces. Additionally, our threat perception has also changed in the last 2 decades with a serious internal threat emerging. And we are facing challenges of hybrid warfare, which is targeting our internal cohesion and harmony, not only the society, but also the armed forces. Pakistan has survived even bigger challenges and has proved to be a resilient nation. We need to adopt a proactive approach and feel confident of our potentials. Military, and we need to realize that military capability is not just the capacity to induct armament. It is a joint interplay of several other components. As per United States Joint Military Staff, the military capability has a set of 7 components. This includes the doctrine, organization, training, material and equipment, personnel, leadership and education, and facility. Among them, only there are 3 hardwares: the material and equipment, the manpower, and the facilities. The rest, there are 4 software components of military capability. We do not need substantial financial resource. Our attention is always on the hardware, and software is ignored. In fact, software guides the induction of the hardware, and so we need to focus on the software of the military capability. Among the software of military component, first of all, it is the doctrine, which describes what tasks will be done and to what degree and how to do them. It describes how capabilities are used, and it also refers to any applicable documentation that provides guidance to units and organizations in the defense sector. Then comes the organization, which considers how armed forces are arranged and their resources are organized to accomplish the task and produce the desired effect. It is the function of structure of force elements and physical components of capability and guided by the doctrinal component of the capability. The doctrine drives the organization. And then from this organization, the training is again a software element of the military capability, which prepares personnel and force elements to execute their assigned tasks in accordance with the doctrine. So the central element is the doctrine, which guides the organization, which guides even the induction of the equipment. The next very important component is the leadership and education. It is the formal learning to prepare military leaders to develop and command armed forces. No matter how well equipped the army is, unless it is the leaders are well conversant, well educated, and highly trained, and they are. It is the man behind the gun, as normally say, and people say that the leadership plays an important role in that. So, as a component of capability, education is distinguished from training. So here the emphasis is not on training. The leadership education is more important, and it is distinguished from training primarily by its purpose. Training prepares individuals and units to perform according to their occupational specialty or assigned doctrinal function, whereas education prepares individuals to lead armed forces, which is a more challenging task, especially in this very challenging environment. Finally, the hardware element comprises of the manpower, including military and civilian individuals, material, equipment, and facilities needed to produce and sustain military capability. So this is very evident, and a lot of emphasis has already been given onto the software on this hardware element. Now, I would be, in order to develop some options for Pakistan, I'm going to consider onto the software of this military capability, and I'm going to present before you in the order of urgency that I consider is important. First of all is the leadership and education. We need highly educated military planners conducting knowledge-based planning to offset material advantages that India currently enjoys against Pakistan. Pakistan is facing paradigmatic and conceptual challenges that need deep understanding of contemporary social reality. I'm not going into the details of this point which I'm making here, and this is not the right place, and I'm only flashing it so that this indicates the requirement of knowledge and understanding. This is only possible through a comprehensive education plan for national leadership, including both military and political leadership. Our existing think tanks and universities, they lack such capability. A purpose-built and staffed National Leadership Institute needs to be built for this task. This institute should work independently across all political and institutional divide and assigned to educate our future leadership. It is through such a consistent effort that Pakistan will be able to develop viable, practical, and localized policies to solve our own problems. The next step is the doctrinal aspect. We inherited British military doctrine as enunciated in our military publications, applicable to World War I and World War II environment, revolving around mechanized and maneuver warfare. Our military publications need a paradigmatic change. Pakistan needs military doctrine to defend an independent sovereign nation and not an imperial interest of a colonial framework, which was driving the force behind the inherited British doctrine. Moreover, after nuclearization, the role of military establishment has also changed. Conventional war, as visualized earlier, is not likely to happen. The new dimension of kinetic and non-kinetic engagement have to be incorporated in our service publications being taught at different schools of instruction and colleges. Accordingly, our military exercises also need to have a paradigm shift. The next is the organization. With the change in doctrine, we need to change the organization of our armed forces. The current structure was designed to support World War II style military operations. A lot has changed, so we need appropriate changes in military organization. The tri-service framework has to be harmonized to create more integrated battlefields with better interarm and service coordination. This will also demand better equipped and organized military force which can conduct military operations under contemporary environment of hybrid warfare. In light of these developments, we can better decide on manpower, weapons and equipment to be inducted and incorporated in our operation plan. And now finally, at the policy level, Pakistan needs to balance its relations with USA, China, and Russia without being party in this great power competition. And this is not an easy task. This is a very difficult task, but it is very urgently required. China has serious reservations regarding our tilt toward US, which is seriously hampering ongoing projects of CPEC, the lifeline of Pakistan. Moreover, our relationship with Russia is also very important, and we need to find some middle ground. This is the test of our diplomats who have to display their skills and serve the national interest of Pakistan. And there's no denying that this is the urgent requirement, and we have to come up with options and with certain approaches. And the last thing which I want to add up to this options available to Pakistan is just want to say that Pakistan cannot unilaterally pursue strategic stability in South Asia unless India shows some desire to cooperate. In absence of such cooperation, Pakistan needs to strengthen its nuclear deterrence and should be ready to respond to all incursions, whether incidental or accidental, planned or unplanned, or from any direction. So strategic stability does not operate in isolation. It has to be from the two sides. And the other side is not cooperating, so allowing vulnerability, because strategic stability depends on the vulnerability of your assets. So if one side is adamant is adamant to create its own BMD shield and feel more safe, so the strategic stability is seriously endangered. So I would like to conclude by saying this, that Pakistan needs to strengthen its nuclear deterrence. So here I end up now, Shehbanu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nasir. Now we'll move to our last session, the question and answer session. We have a bunch of questions for our speakers. Let me read out the question. The first question is from Mr. Akash Shah. He's research officer at Strategic Vision Institute. The question is for Dr. Zafar Khan. His question is, does India's supersonic missile BrahMos hints at country's intention of disarming nuclear strike against Pakistan if it feels the need? And secondly, do you see the recent BrahMos incident on the same lines? Dr. Zafar?
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So shall I repeat the question, or?
Does India's supersonic missile BrahMos hits or hints at countries' intention of disarming nuclear strike against Pakistan or against India?
Against Pakistan, if it feels the need. And secondly, do you see the recent BrahMos incident on the same lines?
Well, as discussed by Brigadier Naeem Salik as well, and some of the points by Dr. Nasir as well, India has got that temptation for counterforce strategy, because the kind of technologies that India is developing is trying to have this first strike or first mover capability, to strike and the potential capability of Pakistan. But it is unlikely, even it was unlikely for the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, to decapitate or to disarm the nuclear capability of the rivals, So it is really illusional or delusional, right? Particularly when you are a mature nuclear weapon state, right? And you have dispersed and you have second strike capability at the same time. It's not likely it's not easy for a state, even if you have develop a counterforce capability with the advanced technology, with the nascent technologies, you're not going to disarm very quickly, As I mentioned in my talk, that it does provide temptation for offensiveness, and offensiveness does provide you to strike first, as it happened in the past, during if you see the military strategy of Germany and military strategy of the Soviet Union and the US during the First World War and the Second World War, you see what happened. They were tempted, and they went into the war. And then, but what happened then? It faced the unintended consequences, So it is not good news for the South Asian or for any region, that temptation for striking first and disarming the capability of the rivals, quickly, and thinking, that rapid victory will come, I think this is illusional, and it's a flawed and dangerous idea that with such technologies that they could disarm Pakistan capability rapidly. I hope this answers the question.
Dr. Zafar, you're not visible. Can you please turn on your video?
It is on.
Okay, then there might be some connectivity issues.
You're
on. It's fine, sir.
Okay,
Akash's second question is also addressed to you, Dr. Zafar. His question is, what could be the possible antidote to supersonic cruise missiles like BrahMos, since they are hard to intercept, even with the best available missile defense systems?
Well, India is developing ballistic missile defense system. Israel has got defense system, then you have the Soviet Union and the US, during the Cold War, they have developed that. And they're trying to make it more sophisticated as the technology comes in, and the new technologies benefit, to develop that. I'm not sure whether we have that capacity or capability, to develop such a defensive system, against these supersonic and hypersonic, because the distances, the geographical distances between India and Pakistan is too short. Even if a ballistic missile comes in, it goes, once it goes, it would hit the target. But countries are developing defensive system, and they're trying to defend the incoming missiles, So, but I'm not sure, how successful that could be, whether or not any country would be in position, to defend and to intercept these hypersonic, if not the supersonic, the hypersonic incoming missiles, given the small geographical distances between the two states. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. The second question is addressed to Dr. Naeem Salik. The question is from Dr. Iftikhar Ali, is Assistant Professor at Department of IR in Karakoram University, Gilgit. His question is the acquisition of technological wherewithal on one side in South Asia sufficient to opt for any counterforce first strike when they know that the other side has secured second strike capability?
Okay, in fact, I would like to continue from where Dr. Zafar left about the previous question. As far as missile defense is concerned, there has been a lot of investment and research and development in terms of ballistic missile defense, but there is no technology available to defend against cruise missiles. The reason being that cruise missiles, they fly at very low levels, normally top level, and they remain under the radar until they come very close to you. So they do not give you any reaction time, and there is no system to defend against these missiles. And that is why whenever any country is trying to defeat the ballistic missile defenses, if these are deployed by the other side, they resort to more and more use of cruise missiles. The missiles, they are cruise missiles generally around the world which are being used are subsonic. And it is only that once they come right on the top of the target, the point defense systems have some probability of hitting if you have very rapid fire and anti-aircraft systems like Vulcan, Phalanx and others. But the matter of BrahMos-like systems, which are supersonic, is a different matter altogether, because they move at the speed of 2.8 Mach and closer to 3 Mach. So they move at such a high speed that they do not give you reaction time. But interestingly, in this last episode, we have seen the vulnerability of BrahMos also, because to maintain that supersonic speed, it has to fly at 40,000 feet. And then it dives once it comes close to the target. And if it is flying at 40,000 feet in the initial part of its flights, it can be detected from a long distance by the radars, as it happened in case of this 9 March incident. So that gives you much greater reaction time. But then do you have any means to respond to these kind of missiles, even if you have detected those? That is not available to any country as yet. The only defense against strike by such kind of missiles is that you should have a matching capability, and the other side should know that not only you have the matching capability, you also have the resolve to respond to any such strike, and that will deter any use of such kind of missiles against you. No defense is going to work against such missiles, so it's only deterrence which is likely to prevent the other side from attempting it. Now, coming to the second question, can you repeat it again?
Sure, sir. Is the question is from Sir Dr. Zafar Ali, is assistant professor at Department of IR Grantham University. His question is the acquisition of technological wherewithal on one side in South Asia sufficient to opt for any counterforce first strike when they know that the other side has a secured second strike capability?
Okay. You see, the point is that is the beauty of the nuclear deterrence, because it provides you a lot of cover. Any advantage the other side may have in terms of the size of conventional forces or technologies, that will be offset. As they say that nuclear weapons, they offset the effect of all other weapons because of their wide range of effects and the amount of destruction they can cause, each weapon can cause. So even if you have a limited second strike capability, nobody will take a chance. That is what Kenneth Walls has argued, that nobody in his right mind is going to attempt a first strike, because you can never be sure of the 100% success of that strike. And I can give you some examples about that. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy was informed by his advisors that the Soviets have 17 ICBMs which can strike at the American mainland. So let's carry out a preemptive strike and destroy this capability once for all. His response was that can this strike be 100% sure? They said no. He said, can 2 of these ICBMs survive? They said, yes, quite possible. So he said, I cannot allow this strike for the sake of New York and Washington. So even if you have a handful of weapons surviving such kind of an attempt by the other side, they have such a strong impact that each individual weapon has such an impact that nobody will take a chance. So even if you have a technological advantage in conventional field or even in the nuclear field, the numbers do not really matter in the nuclear realm. And if you have a semblance of a capability, second strike capability, and your some kind of survivability of your systems, nobody will take a chance. The French argument we know of the 60s, once they developed their deterrence, the questions were raised that with such a small capability, how are you going to deter the Soviet Union with such a large capability? And they said, if they can kill us and we have the capability to chop off one of their arms or their legs, that should be deterrence enough. So that is the cushion which nuclear deterrence provides you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is addressed to Dr. Nasir Hafeez. The question is from Hamdan Khan, he's a researcher at SVI. You mentioned India's Navy's shrinking budget. How do you think India's round-the-year deployment of troops along its border with China would impact its naval modernization program in the wake of India's ambitions to act as a net security provider in Indian Ocean region?
Thank you very much. I think the question of budget allocation and the induction and acquisition of arms, especially in the Indian Navy, of aircraft carrier and nuclear submarines, should not be looked into in isolation. As already I highlighted, that there is a software element of military capability and there is a hardware element of military capability. And most of the strategic planners and thinkers, they are focusing on, and for example, in Pakistan also, it also makes the news, and people also concentrate more on the hardware, that what military equipment is coming into India and how does it impact. But there are software elements which are doctrinal, which are organizational, and which are concerning the leadership. So if those concepts and doctrines are not mature, so the arms acquisition do not fit in, and then they do not synergize and do not give that impact which is desired. So in case of India, a lot of military experts have highlighted that in the absence of a national security paper, national security document, the strategy or national security strategy, the arms acquisition is not going to give that dividend which it should have given. And Dr. Salik will bear me out that the induction of nuclear weapons during the Second World War was a very abrupt event. It was without a doctrinal normal process. That first the doctrine is developed, and then the impact is assessed, and then the weapons are inducted. Here the weapon came and the doctrine was inducted later. So same as the situation in India, a lot of equipment in the Navy is being inducted, and without any operational impact onto without the doctrinal force of the national security strategy. So same, I would re-emphasize for Pakistan also, that whenever there is a desire of inducting any weapon system, it has to be driven by the doctrinal aspects. And unless there is a doctrinal requirement, and for example, there are evidence in the history, a lot of forces, a lot of militaries which were militarily less equipped with technology, managed to succeed and managed to defeat technologically advanced and better equipped armies. That was the force of the leadership, better training, better organization. So if these software elements are addressed, so the advantage which the adversary has of the equipment can be stabilized. So last point I want to say that, for example, you highlighted that the Indian military is deployed round the clock, round the year in the northern borders along with China. So that is the impact of it. That is the operation requirement which the army is highlighting, and the army is asking for more budgets, and that is the issue with the current, you can say, the threat perception which India is facing from China. India's desire to become a blue water navy is already there, but of course the resources are not sufficient. Even in America, the resources are not sufficient. The services rivalry is already there. The desire for bigger chunk into the defense budget is going to be there. A lot of justifications will be provided. So this is a constant ongoing struggle which all the advanced militaries are facing. So let's see who wins. Thank you.
First, I will take General Lodi's comments. Sir, if you'd like to comment, you can unmute yourself.
जी बहुत शुक्रिया सबको। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। तीनों डॉक्टर साहबान से बहुत सीखा है मैंने। एक दो बातें मैं ऐड करना चाहूँगा, ज़रूर उन्होंने कही भी अपनी बातचीत में لیکن کو ری ایمفسائز کرنے کی ضرورت ہے. ایک تو یہ کہ جب ہم کہتے ہیں کہ دو نیوکلیئر ملکوں کے درمیان جنگ پاسبل نہیں ہے تو جنگ کی تعریف کرنا ضروری ہے, کیونکہ جنگ کی جہتیں چینج ہو چکی ہیں, جنگ کا کریکٹر چینج ہو چکا ہے. تو جنگ پاسبل ہے لیکن شاید اس طریقے سے پاسبل نہیں ہے جس کو ہم جنگ سمجھتے ہیں, کنونشنل جنگ سمجھتے ہیں یا اوپن کنفیڈریشن سمجھتے ہیں. اور اگر اس کی میں مثال دوں تو جیسے ہائبرڈ وار کا ذکر کیا تھا ڈاکٹر ناصر حفیظ صاحب نے, کہ ابھی مثال کے طور پہ اگر اکنامک وارفیئر کوئی چیز ہے اور اکنامک ہٹ مین کوئی چیز ہے تو اس کا مطلب اس میں بھی ہمیں ایکسپرٹیز حاصل کرنے کی ضرورت ہے اگر آپ ہائبرڈ وار لڑنا چاہتے ہیں یا اپنے آپ کو ڈیفینڈ کرنا چاہتے ہیں. اسی طریقے سے سائبر وارفیئر ہے. ایک چیز جس پر میں زور دینا چاہوں گا وہ یہ ہے کہ پرسیپشن مینجمنٹ بھی ایک جنگ ہے جس میں نیریٹو بلڈنگ کی جاتی ہے, اور آف کورس اس میں مین میڈیا ہے, اس میں سوشل میڈیا ہے, اس میں مس انفارمیشن ہے, ڈس انفارمیشن ہے, اور ہمیں پتہ بھی ہے کہ کس طریقے سے ہندوستان نے پچھلے دنوں میں استعمال کی ہے. تو آئی وڈ گو along with ڈاکٹر ناصر حفیظ صاحب جو یہ کہہ رہے ہیں کہ ہمیں ریسٹرکچرنگ کی ضرورت ہے آرم فورسز میں. تو یہ جو ہم نے بات چیت کی ہے ٹھیک ہے کہ ہمیں جو ویپنریز ہیں ان کا جواب بھی تلاش کرنا ہے, لیکن جو کریکٹر آف وار چینج ہو کے دائیں بائیں نکل گیا ہے, جب ہم کہتے ہیں فل اسپیکٹرم ڈیٹرنس تو ایکچولی وہ ڈیٹرنس کچھ دیر تک قائم رہتی ہے, اور جو جیسے نعیم صالح کہہ رہے تھے کہ ڈاکٹرینز جو ہیں وہ بدلتے رہتے ہیں حالات کے مطابق, جب ٹیکنالوجی بدلتی ہے تو جب بھی آپ کو ایک ڈیٹرنس قائم کر دیتے ہیں تو کہیں نہ کہیں سے کوئی سوراخ تلاش کر کے جو ہے وارفیئر کسی اور طرف نکل جاتی ہے, تو پھر ہمیں ڈیٹرنس کو ایکسپینڈ کرنا پڑتا ہے. تو فل اسپیکٹرم ڈیٹرنس رکھنے کے لیے ہمیں ایجائل مائنڈس کی ضرورت ہے, ایجائل لیڈرشپ کی ضرورت ہے جیسے ڈاکٹر حفیظ صاحب کہہ رہے تھے, اور ساتھ کے ساتھ ریسٹرکچرنگ کی ضرورت کی ہے. تو میرے خیال میں یہ نہیں کہنا چاہیے ایک تو کہ جنگ پاسبل نہیں ہے, ہمیں کہنا چاہیے کہ جنگ کی جہتیں بدل گئی ہیں, جنگ کا کریکٹر بدل گیا ہے. دوسرا یہ ہے کہ جب ہم فل اسپیکٹرم کہتے ہیں تو اسپیکٹرم کو پھر پھیلانے کی ضرورت ہے, اور یہ جو 2-3 ایسپیکٹ میں نے کہے ہیں جس میں سائبر وارفیئر ہے, جس میں پرسیپشن مینجمنٹ وارفیئر ہے, اس قسم کی چیزوں پر لگاتار نظر رکھنے کی ضرورت ہے. اور میرا خیال ہے اکنامک وارفیئر بڑی امپورٹنٹ ہے. مثال کے طور پہ اگر آپ کے ذہن میں, آپ کے بچوں کے ذہن میں, یہ کافی سارے لوگ سن رہے ہیں, یہ ینگسٹر جو جب ان کو یہ باور کروا دیا جائے کہ آپ کسی نہ کام کے ہیں, آپ کے گھٹنے لگ چکے ہیں, بس آپ معافیاں مانگیں, جو ہندوستان کہتا ہے مان جائیں اور چھوڑیں کشمیر کو, یہ تو آپ کے گلے میں پڑ گیا ہے, یہ سارے پرسیپشن مینجمنٹ اور نیریٹیوز ہیں. جب تک آپ کے پاس ان نیریٹیوز کا جواب دینے کا ویرودال نہ ہو اور اس کو سمجھنے کی اور اس کو آگے سے مقابلہ کرنے کی استعداد نہ آپ اندر پیدا کریں, تو آپ جنگ کے کچھ ایسی جہتیں ہیں جس میں ہارنے کے خطرات اندر ہو سکتے ہیں. بہت شکریہ, تھینک یو.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is addressed to Dr. Naeem Salik and Dr. Zafar Khan both. The question is from Dr. Ashfaq Ahmed. He's an assistant professor at Department of Politics and International Relations, University of Sargodha. His question is, Indian qualitative and quantitative advantages such as BMD system, strategic depth, whereas in military bases at Nicobar and Andaman Island, and US preferential treatment create sense of escalation, dominance, and invulnerability in the minds of Indian policymakers. How dangerous is it for the strategic stability?
We have talked already about the advantages in conventional forces. That is very obvious. Everyone knows India has an advantage in conventional forces. As per the public reports, there is a parity in the strategic capability, but what they call the great equalizing power of the atom, that gives you the advantage that even despite these numerical advantages that the other side has, those are covered up by your nuclear deterrence capability. Now, India does have geographical advantage, and we call a strategic depth, and people bring in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. But I won't be too much bothered about it. Why? Because deterrence does not mean that you have to kill every living being on the enemy's territory, or you have to raise to ground and turn into rubble every standing structure there. Deterrence is a concept where even a nominal damage can have an impact. It's a basically psychological phenomena. Once you talk of the sanctuaries in Andaman Nicobar Island or the vast depths of India, I would be worried about that if I have a counter force capability. That in that case, I have to strike at all of their weapon systems, the strategic delivery system, wherever they are located or stored or hidden. Once you have the counter value, mainly dominantly counter value deterrence capability, we are not into war fighting, we are into nuclear deterrence. And that suffices if you can put to threat some of the major population centers of the enemy, their industrial centers, their communication centers, and important installations and leadership centers. So that is good enough. You don't have to hit each and every target there. So if you have that kind of capability, that advantage in any case, the geographical advantage or the numerical advantage will be nullified. So we should not have any doubts about that capability. The deterrence will be effective as long as we maintain our capability and we show the desired will to use that. Because we do have the physical capability, where the doubt can come is our willingness and readiness to use that once it comes to that kind of situation. And that is if the enemy is sure that will go all the way if it needs to be, and then the deterrence will be effective.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is also from.
Shevano, I would like to add a few points.
Sure, sir, you can add. You can add.
I think Dr. Naeem Salik has amply covered all the dimensions of deterrence, but one point I would like to add in the understanding of deterrence. That deterrence is not automatic. It is not a fixed concept. It is a dynamic concept. It has to be continuously strengthened, and it also gets eroded. So there are a lot of factors which contribute in the credibility of nuclear deterrence and how the nuclear weapon states and their leadership behave. The other side continuously assess the political will of the use of the nuclear weapons. And if the other side is encouraged to understand that the use of nuclear weapons, there is lack of political will, or there's a fear factor which has penetrated into the decision-making circles of the policymakers. So the other side is encouraged to have take some steps which are not desired. So in case of India and Pakistan, and especially in case of Pakistan, I think the confidence in our own weapon system and the confidence of our leadership, especially our political leadership, and especially their understanding of the concept of nuclear doctrine and nuclear deterrence, and their day-to-day utterances in the media. They're all recorded, they're all comprehended, and then accordingly the assessments are made in different quarters of the world where people are looking at Pakistan and assessing their options. So it is not an automatic concept, it is not a fixed concept, it has to be continuously built on, and it has to be continuously guarded against. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is from Nilanjana Paul. He or she is a student at King's College London. The first question is for Dr. Naeem Salik. Considering India's nuclear advancement a threat to Pakistan's security posture, does Pakistan confirm that as a nuclear entity in South Asia, in South Asian security landscape, it is ready to reflect upon its own nuclear modernization in order to promote nuclear non-proliferation?
See, Pakistan has always been supporting the objectives of nuclear non-proliferation. It was not the first to introduce nuclear weapons technology in South Asia. It was in fact a late entrant, and it was the security imperatives of Pakistan which forced Pakistan to go down this route. And India set the trend. They carried out their first nuclear test in 1974. And then in 1998, again, they forced Pakistan's hand. So Pakistan has always tried to promote and support the non-proliferation objectives. And Pakistan believes that those countries who have signed the NPT and they have committed not to produce nuclear weapons, they should stand by their commitments and should not be in violation of their obligations. And we should also be aiming at creating a conducive environment where states do not feel threatened, that they feel they need to develop their nuclear capabilities. So that is as far as nuclear non-proliferation is concerned. As far as modernization is concerned, Pakistan has a credible nuclear deterrence doctrine. It's not on the path of unbridled nuclear buildup. It will only develop this capability of which the size has been determined that, okay, this is the level we need to ensure a credible deterrence capability. And for that, the weapon systems and the requisite delivery systems would be developed, and not beyond that. However, this is subject to what India does, because if they deploy the ballistic missile defense systems, then Pakistan obviously will have to review the size of its credible minimum deterrence. Similarly, if they develop first strike capability, again Pakistan will have to see the potency of that capability, and in accordance with that, Pakistan will have to review its the size of its credible minimum nuclear deterrence. And as we have seen in the past, and I mentioned in my presentation also, that Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is sensitive to both Indian nuclear doctrine as well as its conventional capabilities, because it is aimed at deterring both conventional aggression as well as nuclear threat and nuclear aggression. And we have seen in the recent past, once India introduced that provocative conventional warfighting doctrine of cold start, Pakistan had to respond with short-range nuclear weapons. So these changes here and there would continue to take place, but is not going to be an uncontrolled, unbridled development of nuclear weapons arsenal.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is also from the same from Nilanjana Paul. His question is, to what extent do you think the secrecy around India's nuclear doctrine, India used as a strategic calculative move to portray its non-alignment strategy to the international arena, and how much it benefits from it? Anyone among the panelists can answer the question.
Sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Dr. Salik, kindly unmute yourself.
As I mentioned earlier also, India took pride in the transparency of its nuclear policy by announcing the draft nuclear doctrine and then reaffirming some key aspects of it in 2003. But since then, we have seen over the past 2 decades that except this occasional debate within India about the necessity of continuing with the no first use doctrine, there hasn't been much talk about India's the nuclear doctrine direction, other than that mentioned by Shiv Shankar Menon in his book, and some statement by Parikar and Rajnath Singh, which Indians said that they were their personal opinions. Although a person who is a defense minister or part of the government whatever he or she says, it cannot be personal opinion. It does reflect the thinking within the leadership. However, some of the Indian analysts like Dr. Ali Ahmed and others have also pointed out that there is a degree of ambiguity and secrecy which has creeped in to India's nuclear policy, and they are continuing with this. But it doesn't matter, because we keep an eye on their developing capabilities. Whether they declare how they are going to use that or not, it's up to us to evaluate and assess the direction in which they are going, depending on the technology which they are developing and the policy direction which the technology is going to drive them into. So that's how it is done. They are not going to say anything about it. Once they said no first use, Pakistan never gave much credence to it, and even India did not give much credence to China's no first use declaration. Otherwise, they would not have developed the nuclear capability, citing the Chinese nuclear threat. So these are the declarations are just declarations. In any case, the operation policy always remains secret, and nobody declares that. So it is up to the professionals to carry out an assessment of the threat and see how it is going to materialize.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, we'll take the last question due to the time restraint. The question is for Dr. Nasir Hafeez. The question is from Mr. Murad Ali, he's a researcher at CIS. What do you think the US Indo-military deal impact the strategic behavior of Pakistan in the backdrop of Pakistan's strategic ties with Russia, plus the provision of military arsenal from China in order to rebalance the power equation in the region? What other opportunities Pakistan need to capitalize on in balancing the predominant military posture of India in the region?
Murad Ali, I think is already I highlighted that there is a hardware component of military capability and there is a software component of the military capability. I do not undermine the hardware component, because this physical component is the ultimate delivery of the effects desired. So the ultimate desired effect will always be achieved through the hardware component. But what I am trying to profess and trying to present here is that without any planning, without any direction, if you keep collecting a lot of weapons, those weapons will not add up to the military capability, because there are a lot of issues. There are operational issues. For example, let me give you an example of S-400, which the Indians have recently acquired. These are air defense systems. At the same time, Indians are also acquiring the Israeli air defense systems also. Now, there is a lot of problem of interoperability of these two systems. So if these two systems are deployed on ground, so they will not be able to talk to each other. They will not be able to integrate the data acquisition of one system in another system. So they do not add up to the military capability. So again, the recently inducted Rafale aircrafts. So a lot of other aircrafts which the Indians have, especially the MiG-21s and the 29s, they do not talk to each other. They do not communicate with each other. So a lot of systems are there, and Pakistan is also suffering with this. A lot of radars are inducted by the military. So this arms acquisition process is a very, very tedious process. Unless it is well organized, unless it is guided by the doctrinal aspects and the operational concepts, the military industrial complex will always try to take the benefit of the economic capacity. Today, Pakistan do not have the economic resource. But if, for example, if we hypothetically assume that we have the money, so if you have the money and you move around in the world, so if you are ready to pay the price, leaving aside certain political issues which we might face in USA, so there are a lot of options, especially the French option, in addition to the Chinese option. Even if you are ready to pay the price, so the political you can say the compulsion, even the sanctions are sometimes removed. And in 1998, once India was testing and trying to weigh the consequences of testing nuclear weapons. So I remember there are some information which are available that India at that time launched a very huge campaign in America trying to present its arms market. So a lot of arms lobby in America, they pursued their government to waive off the sanctions so that they can enter into the arms deal with India. So the Indo-US partnership is definitely resulting into the arms build-up. Sophisticated technologies are being inducted in India. But I'm very confident, unless there is a synergized impact of the doctrinal and other components, and especially let me emphasize that Indian manpower of the military forces is seriously lacking. There is no urge in the Indian young youth to join the military. Military is not a preferred profession in India. A lot of multinational corporations, they are paying much better salaries and a lot of opportunities to go abroad. So India, in comparison to Pakistan, is not having a quality manpower in its armed forces. They can import state-of-the-art equipment, but once it comes to the operation deployment, their performance have always been less than remarkable. And then, of course, once let me conclude by saying that inducting military systems in army or in armed forces is not a simple process. It takes decades and years because induction of weapon system is related to training, is related to spare parts and maintenance and organizational, a lot of organizational arrangements which are required to absorb a system into the military organization. So just cosmetically looking at the induction of certain weapon systems may not impact the defense or the military capability of India. So I am not much worried, and I once again re-emphasize that Pakistan should look into the software components of military capability and try to build its own economic resources, and then we will be able to match at least India in all its whatever challenges they are posing. Thank you very much.
अगर मुझे थोड़ी सी इजाजत दें मैं ऐड कर लूं डॉक्टर साहब ने जो कहा जी डॉक्टर नईम सालिक इजाजत है जी मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहूंगा कि देखिए ये जो इंडो यूएस नेक्सस है डॉक्टर साहब तो कह रहे हैं कि नॉट मच वरिड बट आई एम वेरी मच वरिड क्योंकि इसका ताल्लुक एक तो इंटरनेशनल पॉलिटिक्स से है दूसरा आपकी फॉरेन पॉलिसी से है इससे पहले हम कोशिश करते रहे हैं कि हम बैलेंस आउट करें बिटवीन चाइना एंड अमेरिका एंड वी वर क्वाइट सक्सेसफुल अभी मुझे ऐसा महसूस होता है कि शायद अमेरिका आपको वो ऑप्शन नहीं दे रहा बैलेंस आउट करने की तो हमें अपनी फॉरेन पॉलिसी को इस तरीके से इस्तेमाल करना होगा कि अगर हिंदुस्तान और अमेरिका में 12 से 14 बड़े सीरियस मायने हैं और कल में जिक्र भी किया था डॉक्टर नईम सालिक ने कि किस किस्म के मायने हैं कि वो एक इवन रियल टाइम इंफॉर्मेशन जो है वो मिल सकती है आज की उन्होंने बात की है तो वो कि हमारी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है चाइना के साथ इस किस्म की लेकिन शायद हमें भी इस किस्म के गहरे मायने करने की जरूरत हो तो ये बैलेंस करने की कोशिश हम जरूर करते रहे लेकिन ये ख्याल रखें कि जब भी अमेरिका को चूज करना पड़ा बिटवीन इंडिया एंड पाकिस्तान दे विल डेफिनेटली साइड विद इंडिया इसमें कोई दूसरा शक हमें नहीं होना चाहिए इसलिए हमें अपने सेफगार्ड्स लेने चाहिए रशिया के साथ अभी हमारे स्ट्रेटेजिक ताल्लुकात नहीं हो सकते जैसे कि क्वेश्चनर ने अंदर कहा है उसके लिए वी हैव टू वर्क मोर बट चाइना के साथ जो हमारे स्ट्रेटेजिक ताल्लुकात ऑलरेडी हैं उनको और मजबूत करने की जरूरत है और इसका पता भी हमें बता देने की जरूरत है हिंदुस्तान को कि अगर आपने कोई मुआहदे कर रखे हैं तो इससे ज्यादा अच्छे मुआहदे या हमारे चाइना के साथ मौजूद है अदरवाइज आप इसको बैलेंस नहीं कर पाएंगे तो सिर्फ पैसों से या सिर्फ हथियारों से बैलेंस आउट नहीं होती ये जो है स्ट्रेटेजिक थिंकिंग या स्ट्रेटेजी जो है इसके अंदर आपको पॉलिटिक्स को भी लेकर आना पड़ता है तो उसमें थोड़ी सी फॉरेन पॉलिसी भी इन्वॉल्व होगी थैंक यू
Thank you so much, sir. With this, we'll move toward the end of the session. We still have a lot of questions coming in, but due to the limited time, we won't be able to take all the questions. But still, we would like to thank all the participants and all the speakers for generating such an engaging discussion. I would now like to invite Brigadier Dr. Naeem Salik for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Sheikh Banu. I'm grateful to all the panelists and also General Naeem Lodi for contributing to this discussion, and especially the audience who maintained their interest and asked a lot of questions. I can still see 11 questions which have not been addressed, and this shows the level of interest and participation and keenness of the participants. We apologize for not being able to answer all your questions, but we'll have more occasions where you will be able to clarify your doubts and questions, because we also have to maintain the time, remain within the time constraints. So I will not take too much of time. I'll just very quickly highlight the main points of the very rich presentations made by Dr. Zafar Khan and Dr. Nasir Hafeez. I will just emphasize some of the important points. Dr. Zafar mentioned the importance of the impact of emerging technologies on nuclear deterrence. As we all know, nuclear deterrence is a state of mind. It is psychological phenomena. And if you have some advantage in some kind of technologies, that gives you a false sense of security and false sense of advantage and capability, and you might try to exploit it mistakenly, and the value of deterrence might erode in your mind. So that is the problem which the technologies can have on the effect of nuclear deterrence. Then India is on a spree of conventional as well as nuclear force modernization, and all these developments are going to have impact on strategic stability, particularly the developments like ballistic missile defenses, the MIRVs, and the development of real-time surveillance and target acquisition capabilities. Dr. Zafar mentioned that the purpose of India's efforts is to achieve escalation dominance capability. Yes, they may be thinking about it, but this is the most difficult thing to achieve, because escalation dominance can only be achieved if you can dominate the adversary at every rung of the escalation ladder. And that is not possible for even the strongest of powers. India may be desiring to do that, but as of now, it is well beyond India's capability to have escalation dominance. In any case, these are very abstract concepts, escalation dominance and war termination, because in the nuclear war situation, the things will be so confused that fog of war, which Clausewitz talked about, that was about conventional war, and you can imagine the thickness of that fog in a nuclear conflict, and it will be very difficult to take any rational decision in that kind of a situation. So it will be really next to impossible. Dr. Zafar also mentioned that it is the political and geostrategic imperatives of India which are leading India to its force modernization. We understand that for the last couple of years, it is in a standoff situation in the Ladakh sector vis-a-vis China, and that has forced them, because they had been paying lip service to China threat and building up their forces, but they just had deployed 2 corps along the whole of the border with China. But now, after this Ladakh standoff, they have now, for the first time, to physically deploy forces there, which are going to stay there round the clock. And that has put a lot of burden on their forces. And they even had to break up some elements of the 31st Strike Corps and move them to the Ladakh sector. So this standoff has affected their capability. They have been talking about 2-front war and The defense minister also talked about 2.5 wars capability. Their previous army chief talked about a 2.5 wars capability, but they have been exposed that it is well beyond their capability to even contemplate fighting a two-front war. So they have their imperatives, they will do the forced modernization, but now because of this live situation on the Chinese front, all these modernization effort will be distributed between the two fronts. Dr. Nasir Hafeez talked about Indian economic capacity. Yes, they do have deep pockets and they can spend a lot to acquire the arms and equipment from anywhere they want. And plus they have the favorable international political environment where all the major industrial powers, they are willing to share any kind of technology with India. Take the example of US, the France, and Russia has always been one of the major suppliers of arms and equipment to India. Although it has its share has declined a bit, but still it is providing 46% of India's arms. And that brings me to the comment which was made about the possibility of strategic relationship with Russia. Russia has such a long and deep strategic affinity with India that it is not going to diverge much from it and tilt towards Pakistan. That will be a very unrealistic expectation. They are trying to balance the relation between India and Pakistan, but India will still remain their priority because there is obvious economic interest involved, and India being their biggest client of the military hardware, and they would not like to lose that market. And they even in terms of the nuclear technology, they're building dozens of nuclear power plants in India. And so these are major lucrative areas of economic interest as far as Russia is concerned. So they will never do, we should be very clear about it, that they will never do anything with Pakistan at the cost of India. So they will always defer to Indian choices. And if Indians put pressure on them not to give a certain item of equipment to Pakistan, they will not do that. So we should be realistic about it. There was mention of Quad, but Quad as yet is not developing into that kind of a military alliance like NATO or any other, although Chinese have termed it as the Asian NATO. But the serious aspects of the cooperation within the auspices of Quad is in terms of cyber technologies and artificial intelligence. So that is the sharing of information and cooperation in developing capabilities in these two fields, and that they are going to have a major impact in any future conflict. So that is a very serious impact of Quad. Dr. Nasir talked about the need for education. I think it's not only required, the education is not only required for the leadership in the military or the soldiers of the future to be able to perceive the threats and have the intellectual wherewithal to think of the responses to that. It is required at the national level, because we have not been able to put our house in order in terms of education. We do talk that we spend about 2% of our GDP on education, but what we forget is that education is not a federal subject. It is a provincial subject. It has been even before 18th Amendment. And if you add up the allocation to education in the federal budget as well as the provinces, it goes into a very, very large sum in terms of billions of rupees. But what we have been doing is that, one, at the policy level, we have had confusing policies going from one end of the pendulum to the other, and not being able to devise a rational and sensible education policy. And secondly, if we look at the standard of our textbooks, and we keep changing those, and every coming government says that the previous government was wrong and they want to change everything altogether. So we have been playing these games and mismanaging education, and because of that, it affects our economic development. It affects the mention was made by General Lodi about perception management. Now, the perception management can be only in case we have everybody on the same page as far as our national security narrative is concerned. And with lack of education, bulk of the population can hardly understand these issues. And those so-called educated elites also are not educated in the way that they can understand these things. And so are people in the media, electronic, as well as the print media, and the academia and think tanks. They are not intellectually equipped to understand these narratives and then manage the perception, because they are the ones who are going to build the perceptions. So we have to take a wholesome approach. I am glad that Dr. Nasir took a realistic approach. We wanted to give a realistic appraisal of India's capability. While we have to be mindful of India's growing capabilities, we should also be mindful of the weaknesses, and only then we can focus on how to exploit those weaknesses. So with this, I think we have already exceeded our time, and I would once again like to thank the panelists as well as the audience who have shown the patience and interest in following this, and we'll continue to have this kind of interaction in future as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists and participants once again for attending the session. Thank you.